Hello, and thank you for checking out Heart of the Game's YouTube channel. My name is Derek, or to some at our local playgroup, DJ DVD. I am the marketing manager and one of the head sales associates here at Heart of the Game, and I will be introducing a series of videos called Mum's the Keyword, examining some of the 25 plus years worth of Magic the Gathering mechanics, abilities, and keywords. Thankfully, I've been lucky enough to make somewhat of a career out of playing a game that I've been passionate about for most of my adult life. I started playing Magic in late 1993 during my freshman year in high school, right about when Unlimited was switching over to Revised. Like most players, I wasn't playing consistently, but even while I was on hiatus, I was always curious what the game designers were coming up with and what had been added to the game, especially what new abilities or mechanics were introduced to the lineup since my last time playing. I primarily play Commander. I thoroughly enjoy the extensive card pool spanning back to the game's origin. And I always love the feeling of nostalgia that I get seeing an older mechanic broken out in a game. In this series, we will take a closer look at some of the more obscure and interesting mechanics and keywords that have been introduced over the last quarter century of spell slinging. We will define and explain the mechanic, go into some rules and rulings, and finally, give examples of cards and discuss how to take advantage of that episode's featured mechanic in practical applications. Today's mechanic is phasing. Phasing is a static ability that allows permanents to phase out and phase in. Originally seen in the 1996 Magic the Gathering expansion Mirage and the blocks surrounding it, it's primarily a blue mechanic, but there are also instances in both green and white. The mechanic in lore is centered around the Planeswalker Teferi, and in 2017, phasing was reintroduced to Magic on a card printed in the Mardu Vampiric Bloodlust Commander Precon deck, Teferi's Protection. What is now an iconic 2-and-a-white instant, which, amongst other things, at instant speed, phases out all permanents you control. There were only 12 tournament legal cards with the printed keyword ability of phasing, which is predominantly seen on creatures like Sandbar Crocodile. Some creatures don't have the keyword ability of phasing, but an activated ability allowing them to phase out at instant speed, like Rainbow Efreet, but we'll discuss that distinction later on. There are other permanent types that also have phasing, including both an enchantment, Katabatic Winds, and even a land, Teferi's Isle. Additionally, any permanent type can be granted phasing through the use of an aura, like Teferi's Curse, creature, Shimmering Efreet, or with a spell, such as Reality Ripple. At the time of recording this video, we have started to see spoilers for the next core set release, M21. And we have a new version of Teferi being introduced, Teferi, Master of Time, which, as one of its loyalty abilities, has -3. Target creature you don't control phases out, and introduces the new reminder text, treat it and anything attached to it as though they don't exist until its controller's next turn. And just as a side note, phasing was the ability that eventually inspired the Flicker ability. So what exactly is phasing, and what does it do? In short, it temporarily makes the game unaware that those phased out permanents exist. As I mentioned earlier, phasing is a static keyword or ability that causes permanents to phase out and phase in. Permanents phasing out and in is technically the very first thing that happens on every turn of Magic, but outside of Commander, very rarely seen or necessary. During each player's untap step, before the active player untaps, all phased in permanents with phasing that player controls phase out. And at the very same time, all phased out permanents under that player's control will phase back in. So essentially, you cast a permanent with phasing and it enters the battlefield like any other permanent. It hangs around for a little while, until your next untap step to be exact, at which point the phasing event takes place and then your permanent temporarily disappears, according to the game at least. Let's take a look at the comprehensive rules and a few rulings surrounding phasing. Phasing. A keyword ability that causes a permanent to sometimes be treated as though it does not exist. Phasing is a static ability that modifies the rules of the untap step. If a permanent phases out, its status changes to phased out. Except for rules and effects that specifically mention phased out permanents, it can't affect or be affected by anything else in the game. A permanent that phases out is removed from combat. If a permanent phases in, its status then changes to phased in. The game once again treats it as though it does exist. The phasing event doesn't actually cause a permanent to change zones or control, even though it's treated as though it's not on the battlefield and not under its controller's control while it's phased out. Zone change triggers don't trigger when a permanent phases in or out. Tokens continue to exist on the battlefield while phased out. Counters remain on a permanent while it's phased out. If an effect causes a player to skip their untap step, the phasing event simply doesn't occur that turn. While a permanent is phased out, it can't be the target of spells or abilities. Its static abilities have no effects on the game. Its triggered abilities can't trigger, it can't attack, block, or so on. Any one-shot effects that are waiting until this leaves the battlefield, such as that of Banishing Light, won't happen when a permanent phases out. Any continuous effects with a for as long as duration, such as that of Mathis Fiendseeker, ignore phased out objects. Any such effects will expire if their conditions are no longer met after ignoring those phased out objects. Choices made for permanents as they entered the battlefield are remembered when they phase in. A permanent phasing out causes a spell or ability on the stack to have an illegal target if it targets that permanent. As a spell or ability tries to resolve, if all of its targets are illegal, that spell or ability doesn't resolve and none of its effects happen, even the effects that are unrelated to that target. If at least one target is still legal, the spell or ability does as much as it can to the remaining legal targets, and its other effects will still happen. Alright, so we've seen what happens in the game when objects are phased out and phased in, but how does that benefit us? Let's take a look at some practical applications and how to take advantage of this magic, unique mechanic. Phasing can be used both offensively and defensively, and also has a few pseudo-stacks pieces that can be a hindrance to your opponents. Creatures with the inherent keyword ability of phasing aren't really the greatest. You cast them, they're summoning sick, and then the next turn when they could have attacked, they phase out before you untap, which means they won't be around for your attack step and are essentially rendered useless until the turn after. Doesn't seem really strong. What I think can be quite viable is utilizing phasing at instant speed and in response to your opponents. If an attacking creature is phased out, it's removed from combat. So if someone is sending a beefy flyer your way that you have no blocks for, hitting it with a Sapphire Charm for 1 blue mana at least gets rid of it for that combat, to then hopefully be dealt with once it phases back in before another attack. You could also play a Vidalian Illusionist or Dreamfighter, which both stay on the battlefield, threatening to use their ability to phase out one of your opponent's creatures, and actually doing so when warranted. There is another 1 blue instant, Vision Charm, that can phase out an artifact in the same way. Let's say an opponent has a Bident of Thassa and connects with 3 creatures. You can phase out the Bident before damage, stopping its triggers from going on the stack and your opponent from getting those draws. Adversely, if someone tries to Vandal Blast your Helm of the Host, you can phase it out to break the target and have it phase back in before your next upkeep so it can trigger again. Earlier I mentioned that some creatures don't phase out and in each turn, having the keyword ability inherently of phasing. There are a few creatures that have an activated ability of cost, phases out, like Mist Dragon, Rainbow Efreet, and Teferi's Honor Guard, and also what I think to be a quite underrated blue enchantment, Vanishing, that grants this ability to a creature for 1 to cast and 2 to activate. It's like having a counterspell attached to a creature, and it gives it a little added protection against board wipes, targeted removal, bounce spells, etc. A card can't be put into your hand, graveyard, or exile if it has temporarily ceased to exist. Indestructible doesn't stop targeted exiling, like Swords to Plowshares, or bounce spells, like Boomerang. Hexproof can't ward off a Wrath effect, but utilizing phasing, you can counteract all of them. What's even more impressive is as an aura attached to a permanent phases out with that permanent indirectly, activating Vanishing's ability will not just phase out the creature, it'll phase itself out as well, making it somewhat akin to diplomatic immunity, except it allows you to target that permanent still. Phasing can be used to protect your creatures in an unconventional way as well, utilizing an effect like that of Grand Abolisher. If your creatures are never on the board when your opponents can cast spells and activate abilities, they're virtually untouchable. Crystal Golem will phase itself out at the end of turn, or using Teferi's Veil, all of your attacking creatures will phase out at the end of combat. Then, once your opponent's turn comes back around and they can cast spells and activate abilities again, your threats are no longer there, and then they'll be returned on your next turn to be able to attack again. Seems good. Additionally, for just 1 blue mana, Cloak of Invisibility can give a creature unblockable, but it does also give it phasing, which would normally render it useless every other turn. Probably not the most likely to get them out together, but using Teferi's Veil, that phase out trigger would happen before the next untap steps phase out event, so instead of phasing out every other turn, it would simply be unblockable except by walls and could still attack during each of your combats. One of the best cards ever printed, in my opinion, is the Commander 17 Chase Rare Teferi's Protection. It, at instant speed, phases out all permanents you control. This card protects all of your permanents from a Cyclonic Rift, a Damnation, a Settle the Wreckage, and just about anything else that threatens your board state and mana investment. There are a few misunderstandings when it comes to Teferi's Protection. You are not temporarily out of the game, only your permanents become phased out. So in theory, you can still get milled out, or someone could end an EDH pod with a wins the game effect, such as Laboratory Maniac or Epic Struggle. But in the way of utilizing phasing to protect your permanents, this card is the nuts. There are a few more cards featuring phasing I wanted to point out for their ability to potentially hinder an opponent. Teferi's Realm causes each player to select a permanent type of theirs that phases out each turn. This could be impactful if someone has a diverse board state, a little less so if they don't have any of one permanent type. But if an opponent has, say, a Rhystic Study, Mana Rock, their commander, and some land, something of theirs is getting phased out that turn. Katabatic Winds, while being the only enchantment with the printed keyword ability of phasing, obstructs your opponent's creatures with flying. Against an airborne assault commander deck like Kaalia of the Vast or Scion of the Ur-Dragon, this could divide your life loss by half. And lastly, Shimmer, an enchantment for 2 blue and 2, can be quite viable as it has you choose a land type when you cast it. If you're in, say, Bant and choose Swamps, none of your land will phase out or in each turn, but all of your opponents with that land type will. They wouldn't even be able to float the mana between phases unless they had an Omnath effect, since mana empties after each phase and no player gets priority or can cast spells during the untap step when the phasing event takes place. This has been an in-depth look at one of Magic's unique mechanics. Hopefully this video has been helpful in understanding the phasing ability and how to utilize it during gameplay. We will be uploading more in this series, so comment below what mechanic or keyword ability you would like to see on the next Mums the Keyword. Thank you again for watching Heart of the Game's YouTube channel. If you have found this video helpful or entertaining, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the bell to be notified of our latest content upload. That's it for me, DVD. I'll see you all on the next Mums the Keyword.